Dreams. What are dreams? Are dreams merely the firing of neurons in a tired, bored mind? Memories of the previous day recounted in a strange and perplexing manner? Or is there something more to the unnatural worlds we visit in the night? Good evening. Tonight, I'm going to be reading you 2 short stories inspired by my most memorable nightmares, with some minor alterations, because very few of my dreams form a coherent narrative without some embellishment. I know the tradition is usually to group stories in 3s, but I decided to make this video on a whim, so we'll all just have to settle for 2. With that, please, get comfortable, grab a hot cup of tea, and warm yourself by the fire, and enjoy tonight's entertainment. Let us begin with an old one. This is the first nightmare I can remember that stuck with me, for this transpired many years ago now. I think the reason I still remember this dream was not because of its content, but the way it occurred, and how I was powerless to stop or change it. This is the Black Wolf. It was midsummer. The sun had long since set, though the moon had yet to reveal itself. The sky glowed a dark blue over a high school that rested between town and the undeveloped land beyond. A school dance was in full swing that night, but while many were enjoying the music, drinks, and company of others, 3 students traveled away from the school, cutting a trail through the wild, undeveloped lands where few ever go, passing through the tall, unkempt grass to a secluded spot some ways from the rest of the school. They came to a line of large rocks, evenly spaced along the edge of a hill, placed no doubt as a kind of border. Here the music of the dance was barely audible, except for the low thump of the bass. The 3 sat on a rock overlooking the nearby forest that sat in a depression beyond the stones. The trees were old, the grass and underbrush growing tall around their bases. From where they sat, the forest canopy was almost level with them. If it were any closer, one could walk across their tops. Alongside the rock they had chosen to rest upon was a forgotten dirt path with an old metal gate wedged between the trees to block cars from driving through the forest. Not that anyone would, or had in many years by the looks of it. Very little could be seen past the gate, as the path wound haphazardly through the woods, disappearing into the darkness beyond only a short ways in. But the small group had no interest in the forest. They had ventured out into the dark, far from the lights of the school, to smoke away from the prying eyes of teachers. The 3 students, Craig, Tom, and Sarah, chatted aimlessly about school, the dance, work, and anything else that came to mind while they lit up. But after only a short time, their conversation was stopped by a sharp sound from the nearby woods. They looked to the forest, the mood suddenly changing. "Was that a scream?" Tom asked, standing up suddenly. "Come on, let's check it out," Craig said, already navigating the uneven slope down to the forest. Sarah stood up, watched her friends leap over the rusted gate and disappear into the darkness of the trees. She didn't want to follow them. Should I get someone? She wondered, looking back towards the school. But a feeling compelled her to face the woods. She went forward, carefully making her way down to the gate. Beyond the gate, within the trees, there was only black. Then she heard a shout. It was Craig. Then came another from Tom. On instinct, she grabbed the gate and climbed to find her friends. She ran down the dirt path, visibility non-existent, only the feeling of flat dirt under her feet to guide her. A few times she stopped to reorient herself when the ground raised or when her foot caught on a root. After what felt like ages, she stopped. There was no sound. No wind, no animals, no screams or calls from her friends or from whoever they came here to find. She turned around but saw nothing. It was pitch black within the trees. What little light the sky gave off was gone, and now she couldn't even be sure which way she had come. Spinning in place, desperately trying to orient herself, she heard a low rumbling from behind. Before she could turn to face it, a blinding pain seized her. She screamed, the sharp sound traveling beyond the woods. She looked to the forest with the two boys, the mood suddenly changing. Was that a scream? Tom asked, standing up suddenly. Come on, let's check it out, Craig said, already navigating the uneven slope down to the forest. Sarah stood up, watched her friends leap over the rusted gate and disappear into the darkness of the trees. She didn't want to follow them. Should I get someone? She wondered, looking back towards the school. But a feeling compelled her to face the woods. She went forward, carefully making her way down to the gate. Beyond the gate, within the trees, there was only black. Then she heard a shout. It was Craig. Then came another from Tom. On instinct, she grabbed the gate and prepared to climb. But she stopped. She reached into her pocket, suddenly remembering the flashlight she carried. She turned it on and climbed to find her friends. She ran down the dirt path, shining the flashlight all around at the looming old trees that surrounded her. The dirt path wound endlessly into the forest. She swerved around uneven ground and plants that had overgrown into the path and leapt over roots. After what felt like ages, she stopped. There was no sound, no wind, no animals, no screams or calls from her friends or from whoever they came here to find. She turned around to face the way she had come. Maybe it wasn't too late to go back and get help, she pondered. She heard a low rumbling from behind. Turning quickly, led by the flashlight, she stopped. Standing at the edge of the path was an animal. The creature was not unlike a wolf, but covered in long, wispy black fur and with an unnaturally long body that stretched off between the trees and into the void beyond the flashlight's beam. The beast was giant, easily 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Its black fur seemed to morph into the shadows even in the beam of the flashlight. Its eyes were shining pinpricks of white, set too wide in its face. A face that peeled open to show a long line of sharp teeth glowing like its eyes. To say it grinned ear to ear would be an understatement. The row of spike-like teeth continued well past the back of its skull, splitting its elongated neck in two nearly to the shoulder. Their gaze met for only a moment before the hound lunged at her, its jaw unhinging wide enough to swallow her whole. She screamed, the sharp sound traveling beyond the woods. She looked to the forest with the two boys, the mood suddenly changing. Was that a scream? Tom asked, standing up suddenly. Come on, let's check it out, Craig said, already navigating the uneven slope down to the forest. Sarah stood up, watched her friends leap over the rusted gate and disappear into the darkness of the trees. She didn't want to follow them. Should I get someone? She wondered, looking back towards the school. But a feeling compelled her to face the woods. She went forward, carefully making her way down to the gate. Beyond the gate, within the trees, there was only black. Then she heard a shout. It was Craig. Then came another from Tom. On instinct, she grabbed the gate and prepared to climb. But she stopped. She reached into her pocket, suddenly remembering the flashlight she carried. She held the small black cylinder in her hand when a chill ran through her. Slowly, she put it back in her pocket. Something in the back of her mind told her it would be better not to see it. She looked back one last time before the school, but the compulsion remained. She shook the thoughts from her head and climbed to find her friends. While the previous story occurred many years ago, I experienced this next one little more than a month prior to this. In fact, it was the catalyst that inspired this whole video. While many of my dreams I find terrifying at the time are more humorous or simply nonsensical in the morning. Even now, though, this dream still sends shivers down my spine. It's also one of the only instances I can recall of waking frozen in place, with my very own sleep paralysis demon to greet me. Anyhow, on to our next story. Ceiling rot. It was the afternoon on a warm fall day. The leaves had not yet begun to change color, but there was a chill in the air that said the warmth of summer had reached its end. Two brothers, George and Sam, had come to visit their grandmother and bring her groceries as she had recently begun having trouble leaving the house. Entering, they greeted their grandmother and carried the items they had brought in. The house was in decent condition for its age. There was still wallpaper in some of the rooms and hallways, and though it had become discolored over the years, there was no noticeable damage beyond that. A few boards creaked underfoot, and here or there the paint was peeling, but overall the house barely showed its age, except in the antiquities, outdated appliances, and lack of more modern technology. They chatted idly while stocking the fridge and cupboards. Their grandmother put on the kettle for some tea while they worked. Soon enough, the kitchen was stocked, and they moved on to the rest of the items. Sam grabbed some things that belonged on the second floor and left to put them away. George took a package of paper towels to its place in the closet in the living room. It was a small, cramped space into which little light penetrated. George flicked on the light switch within and looked around. Towels and cleaning supplies lined the shelves, and up on the top of the middle shelf was only a single roll of remaining paper towels. He reached up to place the new package beside the one that remained. As he resettled himself, a spot of yellow caught his eye. Looking up to see what he had noticed, he saw that above the door was a small yellowed ring no larger than his palm. Water damage, he supposed. He drew out the digital camera he kept on him and took a picture. He didn't have the tools or know-how to deal with it himself, but figured the house insurance might cover any damages. Flicking off the light as he left the closet, he saw his grandmother coming to take a seat on the couch. She inquired about the camera in his hands, and not wanting to alarm her with potential damage to the house, he brushed it aside, saying he was simply taking some pictures of the place. He offered to take her picture while he was there. She agreed, and he crossed to the other side of the room. Aiming the camera, his grandmother was centered in the frame, sitting on the right side of the sofa with a small table beside her. Just over it, the door to the closet was visible, left ajar when he had left. It cut a pure black line down the left side of the image. Not wanting to bother closing it, he took the photo. Checking the picture, he saw that there was a great shadow covering most of it. The sun was shining on another part of the house, and without it, the lighting in the room was unusually poor, with only old lamps and dim bulbs to light it. Turning on the flash, he lined up the camera for another shot. With a snap and a flash, he took the picture. Glancing down, he tapped the buttons to view the photo. It came out well lit and in focus. But he paused. There was something else. In the background, just to the right of his grandmother, through the closet door, visible only by the flash of the camera, was a figure. It had a human-shaped torso, but no further similarities could be found. It had no arms, barely stumps at the shoulders. Its skin was yellow and clinging to its skeleton like melted plastic. Black veins slithered across its body. The head was something like that of a horse, with bulging dead eyes. Its position was contorted, like every bone in its body had been broken and set wrong to heal. If it were to move, it would no doubt sound like the cracking of dozens of knuckles. The whole thing gave the impression of a dead animal washed ashore to dry out in the sun. But worse still, it did not stand in the doorway, for it had no legs. Instead, from the waist down, was a taut membrane stretching up out of frame to the ceiling, from which it hung upside down, as if it had grown from the surface itself. Slowly, fearfully, George raised his head from the camera. The black void through the closet door seemed to reach out to him in dreadful silence. Then, a crack. From the dark, the thing flew forth, its mouth agape. With a cracking of bone, maw unhinged, it swallowed George's grandmother from head to hip like a snake, and as quickly as it had sprung, so too did it slither back into the black from whence it came. After a moment of shock, George reacted on reflex. Dropping the camera, he chased the monstrous thing into the closet, slamming the door open and hitting the light switch as he did. Nothing. It was empty. Looking around desperately, his eyes glanced upward. On the ceiling was a large, yellowed stain. The water damage he had seen before, and now it nearly covered the entire ceiling of the closet. The paint was bulging and in bubbles, uneven and flaking in places. Black rings of mold seemed to grow with unnatural speed before his eyes from the place the creature hung, as if it had corrupted the very surface it had emerged from. Slowly, ducking low, he backed from the room, tripping over himself, never taking his eyes off the ceiling. But now, back in the living room, there was so much more ceiling to be wary of. Minutes later, his brother found him and questioned him on his sudden, inexplicable fear of the ceiling and the whereabouts of their grandmother. That same day, police combed the house, but no trace of the grandmother was ever found. George was arrested, being the last person to see her alive, and now displaying unusual behavior. It was believed that he had killed her and hidden the body somewhere, only to lose his mind after completing the act. The monster was no more than a figment of his guilt-riddled mind. The photo was dismissed as a fake or a misidentification of something mundane within the closet. Though he wasn't charged with murder due to the lack of a body or any other evidence, George's persistence at the existence of a monster that grew from the ceiling landed him in a mental hospital. The house was put up for sale shortly after, but was never sold. Abandoned, it was left to rot. But that was not its end. For years later, a team of amateur paranormal investigators would come to that house. Not convinced that the photo was a fake, they sought the truth. What they would find is that the thing in the photo was not the only entity lurking within the walls of that house. But that is a story for another time. And that is where we will end tonight's entertainment. I hope you enjoyed these two tales. I was planning to include the next part of the dream to tell what those investigators found, but sadly I ran out of time making this. Perhaps I will share more stories of nightmares in the future, or stories of my own making, without the influence of dreams. We shall see. Until next time, good night, and happy Halloween. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please press all of the buttons and follow me in all the places. Hope to see you next time. But until then, good night.